All right, yeah, so we're not gonna like give you a giant step study schedule because in my experience, you're not gonna follow it anyway, you're gonna do whatever you want. So we'll just talk about like what you actually should consider doing and like what worked for us. Stuff people use / need, first aid, UWorld, Cathoma, just do it. Sketchy Micro is super helpful. There's a lot of people that said that Sketchy Micro was better than Picmonic for at least the bug stuff. So if you don't mind paying extra, it might be worth just doing it for that, even if you're going to do Picmonic for everything else.
I second that. Sketchy, definitely worth it. I wasn't a believer until you started using Sketchy like the month before STEP and learned all the bugs using Sketchy. Like, I'm awful at bugs. So even if you just get it for that, it's worth it.
Yeah. DIT is pretty good, even if you don't want to pay for it. You just use the stolen version. That's pretty much what I did. Golia and the audio lectures are good. There's like some inaccuracies in there, but there aren't really enough inaccuracies for it to be a problem. And usually they're like things that have been hammered home to you at this point because like something changed recently and they have told you about that. And then the practice exams are pretty helpful just to see where you're at. Like, kind of space it out. They're going to give you those two, I think at the beginning of next year, that the school administers, and then after that you can figure out how you want to space them out, like once a month for a while, and then like once every 2 weeks as you get closer, just to make sure you're like on track for the score you want. Obviously the newer ones are like a little bit better than the older ones. The older ones, the only real difference that I noticed is the question stems aren't quite as long, so they might not be as good for like timing purposes, but like the scores I got weren't like vastly different between those. And then other stuff you can use, Picmonic's good. Picmonic's like really good for the vitamin section because that stuff's a pain in the ass to memorize, and it's easier to just do that for all the like, you know, you have too much vitamin K or too little vitamin K or B12 or whatever. The Anki decks, I don't know if you all have found those, like Rosencephalon or whatever it's called now. You don't have to do the whole thing because it's kind of a lot, especially if you're going to do some other stuff like first aid or DIT. I just did it for biochem and immuno because like the stuff, like the organ system stuff isn't so much straight memorization, it is like it makes sense. You understand like why you're using a drug to treat something or why something happens. Biochem and immuno is more like straight memorization, you just need to get it down. So I kind of just did that for those two things and then didn't bother reading first aid. Shelby used Step Secrets, I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I don't know if y'all have Step Secrets. It's not that long. It's pretty like bullet points, but it gives you like a case and then like it asks you questions and kind of goes through. I just read it the last week before my test, just like make sure I had all the big pictures and like make sure I wasn't missing anything.
Yeah, and you can use RX and Kaplan if you haven't already used them. I don't really know that it's worth it to like go through those questions that you've already done again. The UWorld questions are significantly better. RX's questions tend to be a little bit easier and not as time consuming, so you're not getting a good idea of timing. And Kaplan's questions tend to be like really nitpicky on small details occasionally that just don't matter or that you're not going to find anywhere else and aren't going to show up on STEP. Do you have any questions about that before we move on? Okay. All right. So my study day, I'm not going to give you like a study schedule for like, you can figure out how you're going to break it down week by week. But a normal study day, it's pretty long. I got up at 4:30 in the morning, I went running, I listened to Gulgen while I was running. I mean, if you're gonna go to the gym or something, like Gulgen's not high yield enough to like sit down and take notes on, but if you just wanna play it while you're doing something else, it just kinda helps like solidify stuff you've already studied. Then I did the Anki, the biochem, and the immuno. It does take a while, so I think I was spending like 2 hours a day doing it just because you have so many cards you have to get through. And then from 9 to 5 every day I did like DIT, Sketchy or UWorld. I didn't actually read first aid before I took STEP. I just watched most of DIT like twice, and then did Sketchy for bugs and UWorld for some questions. And then 6 to 8 I reviewed with somebody. We'll talk about like setting up like a study buddy system in a minute, and then you know, get a decent amount of sleep, like 7.5, 8 hours of sleep a night. You're going to be kind of exhausted just because you're sitting there studying all day, which is surprisingly taxing. And then about the whole like not using first aid thing, if that's your jam, like go for it, read it, but I can't sit down and just like read first aid and memorize it. It's way too boring. The DIT videos are like at least a little bit more interesting. And if you put them on like double speed, you can get through an entire organ system in a day. And you can, just like do all of the organ systems, I think, in like 2 weeks that way, and then just repeat it again. For UWorld, the only advice I have for you is don't try to do too many questions a day. I think I did like 200 a day for a week at one point and just got so burnt out doing questions that I never bothered finishing UWorld because I just didn't want to see it again. Ultimately, it comes down to you don't have to do all the things, and you don't have to do all the things that people say, like you have to read first aid. You don't have to. Like my step score is not a problem, and I didn't, so. And then for, this is a quick tip for if you're gonna do the Sketchies. The way I did them was the first time I watched the Sketchy, I screenshotted the picture. If I were you, I wouldn't use the screenshots they give you, like screenshot the actual video, because sometimes the screenshots for some reason don't necessarily have all of the stuff in them. They're not like quite the same as the video pictures. And then I would just write down the title, and then a synopsis of like all of the important things in it and what goes to what. And I don't know if you've used OneNote, you can kind of like collapse the little area, like you can make a collapsible bullet. So I'd leave the picture, do this, and then maybe the next day after I did one, I'd come back and try to retype out the whole thing from memory, repeat that for a couple days, and you'll have it down. And that way you can kind of see like what you retyped out versus like what you wrote down originally. And it's a quicker way to review them than having to watch like a full 15-minute Sketchy over again. And it gives you an idea of like how much of it you know and if it's something that you do need to watch again. For the study buddy thing, it's kind of useful. One, it keeps you accountable. So if you and your partner say like, we're gonna do like all of cardio today, and then we're gonna meet up at 6 o'clock tonight and talk about cardio for 2 hours, you don't really have a choice in whether or not you get cardio done today. Like you are either gonna show up unprepared and let them down, or you're gonna do it. And then just get like first aid or something out and like kind of quiz each other on like, one person starts from the back or one person does the drugs for that section, and kind of quiz each other on it and see what you've got. Just going through that kind of helps you realize like whether you got it or if you just kind of like memorize something without like making sense of it mentally. You can also do that for Sketchy. You can just like ask somebody like all of the characteristics of a disease and have them say it. You can do that for drugs, especially some of the weirder ones, like the stuff that's in the, I guess like the chemo drugs, because I don't think we do a very good job of covering that stuff. Like you're gonna have a decent idea about like cardio drugs and respiratory drugs, but the chemo drugs are not gonna be so great. And UTMB doesn't do such a great job of teaching you antibiotics, so you might wanna do that as well. And then toward the end of studying, like once you've got most of that stuff down, just like kind of popcorn it, like go random topics. Like I would, regardless of what you did that day, just be like, I'm gonna ask you questions about respiratory today, and you're gonna ask me questions about cardio, or ask questions about something really interesting you found in UWorld that you don't think the other person's gonna know. I mean, don't talk about stuff that's obvious. Like make sure you're challenging the other person and trying to like teach each other something.
Yeah, so when me and my study partner would study, we would normally just discuss drugs for an hour because we were both bad at drugs, and then we do the same thing for bugs, and we would just pick a section in first aid and go through it and then quiz each other back and forth, and then the next day we would review those sections quickly and then do another section. We also talked through like pretty much all of the biochem section because it's just awful to try to like draw the pathways or quiz on the pathways just to learn some of that.
Yeah. And the Anki deck does a surprisingly good job of like, it has little like screenshots or pictures of certain parts of the pathways. So you'll actually like end up memorizing the whole pathway without having to sit down and like stare at it for 4 hours until it sticks, or like redrawing it repetitively.
The Anki decks, they like have a lot of the details in there from the biochem and like the immuno section, so like you don't realize you're memorizing them, but you just keep doing the decks and then you know them, and then you'll go back through them again and be like, I don't know how to know that, but I like came up with several questions in UWorld and on STEP that I was like, I don't know why I know that, but it was in that Anki deck, and that's the only reason I remember that. So yeah. I think they work.
And then also like if you're the kind of person who's highly distractible, don't pick like your best friend as your study buddy because you're never gonna get anything done. I mean, if you can like focus, that's fine, but otherwise like pick somebody random that you don't think you're gonna kill if you hang out with them every day for 3 months, and go with that.
So this is kind of what my study day looks like. I would normally get up at like 5:30, and then I would do Sketchy from 6 to 7, and I would just rewatch them on 2 times speed, and I just kept rewatching them. And then from 7 to noon, I would do UWorld or first aid, and then take a lunch break, and then on the days you have PBL or POM, do that. If not, just go back to UWorld or First Aid, whatever you still need to do more of. Then I would go to the gym and cook dinner from like 3 to 5:30. When I went to the gym, that was my hour of like TV time sanity, so that's when I would watch an hour of TV. But I would listen to Golden, like when I got up in the morning, I would just hit play until like while I brushed my teeth, got ready, I would just listen to it then, like while I cooked dinner or while I folded clothes, like whatever, that's when I would listen to it. And then at night, we would do drugs and bugs with someone, and then until I went to bed, I would just finish up whatever was left from the day. Well, these didn't translate very well. But, so I did use First Aid, and so I don't know if y'all have heard, but some people do like a first pass, a second pass, a third pass. So in first pass, like I just read First Aid. So don't memorize it. It sounds silly. People told me that. I was like, that's a waste of my time. Why am I just gonna read it and not learn anything? But it works. Just read it, don't memorize it. And so during first pass, I did that. I listened to Pathoma, and I like annotated Pathoma into my First Aid. I started listening. I didn't really start Sketchy yet because I was still anti-Sketchy at that point. And I did RX questions. If I was to go back, I probably wouldn't do RX questions at all, but I did do those during the first pass. And then during the second pass, you like start memorizing all of First Aid. And then I started doing the Kaplan questions, and I did start doing some Sketchy at this point. And then the last pass is when I did UWorld and learn anything in First Aid that you think you don't know, and keep doing Sketchy and Goleon. So my first pass, sorry, we go back. So it took about 2 months to just like read through it, because some of First Aid, like I'd never read before. So that took about 2 months. The second pass took about 6 weeks, and I think the third pass took about a month to do. And then I had like a week and a half, 2 weeks left before my test. So I ended up doing a fourth pass just on what I thought were my weaknesses and finishing up things I didn't know.
Yeah. I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about Galjan during your second pass, are you talking about reading the Galjan book or
No.
listening to the videos?
The book was way too detailed for me. I never opened the book. I had it. Just listening to the audio. I would say listened to it, I finished it, and I just started over. Because he says stuff, he's pretty funny, like it's not that bad to listen to, and it just sticks.
I mean, like the book is useful. The book was useful like while you're taking classes, but you're not going to have time to read Goljan. Like this doesn't seem like a lot of work, but it's surprisingly long. Yeah.
So were these your days like a couple months before?
Yeah, like after classes end.
Okay.
Before classes end, you just need to figure out like what works for you. I mean, the last couple blocks aren't real blocks. Like there's not a lot there. And you like know enough that you can kind of tie stuff together. Basically what I did to study, I think for like the hem-onc derm, or whatever, the MSK derm test, you can, if you have DIT or you have the DIT lectures, like if you just watch the DIT lectures, which takes like a day or two, and then if you want to get ahead on UWorld, do the UWorld questions or whatever questions, like that's enough to like get an A in the class. It's not, don't like kill yourself trying to study for those things for weeks on end, because it's just a waste of your time.
Yeah, I would say
And they're not super high yield topics for STEP either.
when we were still in class, I feel like I'd probably study for almost like maybe an hour or two a day. And then like the last week, what I would do is like my section of First Aid, I would put like whatever class we were in, that section on the week of the test. So like the week we had our midterm for GI, I would like be on GI on whatever pass I was on, so that it matched up a little better. So at least the week of the test, like I wasn't doing like double duty kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. And then also like if you're gonna do UWorld and like the first pass thing, like don't try to do UWorld before you go through First Aid at least once. Because if you do UWorld like on its own, it's not as meaningful as if you've actually like seen some material and you have like something to tie it back to, or like a, you know, like a decent understanding of everything. Otherwise you're just like learning random disparate facts and you can't like really tie them together, and so it's not as useful or as good a use of your time. Tips. So don't move your test, just don't do it. There's no reason to do it unless you're like legitimately failing the practice test you're taking. At some point you're gonna realize that like you just wanna take this thing like 2 weeks before the test actually happens, because your practice tests are probably gonna start like going up in score and you're gonna hit like a wall. Take a day off every week. Like just pick like Saturday or Sunday. Don't do any work. You're gonna have to do like life stuff anyway at some point, like grocery shopping. Don't study the day before the test. I tried doing that. You don't get anything out of it, and it just like stresses you out because at like some point you're gonna see something you don't remember, and it's gonna like you're gonna like blow the whole thing out of proportion. Work out and eat healthy. Like if you don't work out at some point, you're just gonna like completely lose your mind doing this. You gotta like de-stress somehow. Go to the testing center in advance. Like if you're taking it in what's Diane Lane? Yeah, like go up there, see how long it takes to get there at the time you're supposed to be testing, so you make sure you have time to like get to the testing center and you know where it is and you're kind of comfortable like with the whole thing. They're not going to let you like walk in and check out the room. I think you can do that if you sign up to take the practice test in advance there, but otherwise just go up there and like see where it's at and what's around there.
For the testing center, I don't know. The day I took the MCAT, it was a Saturday. I was like, there's gonna be no traffic. There was a fatality. The road was shut down. So after that, I think I'm scarred for life. So I know a lot of us, like, we stayed in a hotel that was very close just because I'm like not chancing it of anything like crazy that could happen. So you can always consider that too.
Yeah. Pack a bunch of random snacks for your test day because you have like, I mean, you can take a break between every block. There is enough time there to like take a 5 or 10 minute break between every block if you want to do it. That's what I did. I don't see a point in like stopping for half an hour because then your brain kind of like disengages and you have to get back into it. Don't pack like a giant sandwich because you're just going to get like postprandial. You go back in there and pass out on the keyboard. And some caffeine, just so you're not like, don't like try to drink 4 cups of coffee for the day. Just like, you know, bring some Red Bull you can drink between blocks or something like that so you're kind of like level the whole time. Leave yourself some time off after the test. Don't take it like the week before you're supposed to start rotations because you're going to start rotations and be like dead. There's like a solid like 2-week hangover after taking step of just like I don't want to move. And then also like if you haven't started Firecracker and you're not one of those Firecracker people, like don't decide to do that right now because you're never going to finish it and you're going to want to jump off a cliff at some point.
That's good.
Yeah, so that's pretty much what we got. Questions?
How many practice tests did you take? Like full length tests?
I only took 2.
6. I mean, it just depends. Like, I mean, I was using them as like a gauge of like where I'm at. So you take the 2 from the school, and then after that, I think I took 1 the first month, 1 the second month, and then like every 2 weeks after that, or something like that. So like kind of increasing in frequency as you get closer. You can start with the easier ones or start with the hard ones. It doesn't really matter. The scoring like comes out the same in the end. Like the test might seem easier or harder, but like it seemed to me like the score in the end, you know, if the test was easier or it seemed easier, you're still gonna get the same score as if it seemed harder because it's just based on how everyone else does, not based on like how you do. And I kind of reviewed some of the answers, like the study buddy thing. If you both take a practice test the same day, you can kind of like go back and try to figure out who knows the answer to a question and see what they are, but I wouldn't spend too much time trying to figure out test answers for those practice tests because there aren't real answers out there and some of the stuff on the internet is just like wrong. So.
When do we need to think about signing up for the MCAT?
Step. You're like December, November, December, is that?
Yeah, I don't even remember.
They'll tell you.
Okay.
Yeah. Basically, you just like have to go get a passport photo taken, and then you pay some cert fee, and you mail this thing off, and 3 weeks later, they're like, here's your permit, pick a test date. I mean, you can do it now if you want, and you can get the permit and not pick your test date for a while if you're not sure. Like, it really just, like, you don't like sign up all at once. It's like, you send some stuff in, it takes a few weeks, they send you a permit and a number, and then you can log into the website and pick a day and a location.
So did y'all start preparing to like step now?
No.
Or did y'all wait like till after the break?
Yeah.
Yeah, I started like in January when we started school back. And at the beginning, like, it's not super intense. Like, I still studied for class and then just like did a little bit each day, and then it just kind of ramps up as you go.
Yeah.
One thing I did, if you're a first aid person like I was, I took it and I got get the new one and then get like the bindings chopped off and get like the spiral put on it, because then you can fold it over where you just look at one page at a time and I loved having it like that.
And if you have like crazy notes in your first aid out of like the textbooks for the classes, just like throw it out and buy a new one. No, I mean honestly, like you just get bogged down reading that stuff, and it's not really worthwhile. You're not going to need to know like some super specific pathophys for the GI tract. Like the stuff on first aid or on STEP is like pretty straightforward and basic. If it's in first aid, it's probably worth reading. Beyond that, you're not really going to get a question on like some obscure thing.
And if you're a person that likes to write in your first aid, whenever you start studying for STEP, I would just make sure that like UWorld is in like a certain color. So
Yeah.
when you go back and studying, like honestly, I would ignore most of the stuff I'd written in there, but I would make sure I knew like what was in the UWorld color. Cause like first aid and UWorld, like at the end, like gotta know those. The rest of it, debatable. So I would just make sure that like that stands out with everything else you wrote in it.
Yeah. What else do y'all want to know? Yeah.
When did y'all take the test?
I took it June 1st, and I had like 2.5 weeks
Yeah.
left after I took it.
I think I took it like 5 days after that, maybe. So I had like 2 weeks off.
And I wish I would have taken it like a week earlier.
Yeah, me too.
Like when you get to that point, you know everything you're gonna know, and like no matter how much more I studied, it wasn't gonna matter.
I mean, like, unless you're like not preparing properly, the STEP to some extent is like, there's like an IQ limit to like how well you're realistically gonna do. Like you can start studying now and you're probably gonna get the same scores if you start studying next year. Like you're just gonna max out, like there's only so much you can shove in there. And you're gonna realize that when you get closer, because there's gonna be a point where like it just seems like everything going in is coming out the other side. Like you're dumping something every time you learn something. And you're like, practice test score is just gonna like flatten.
You know, on the NVMEs, like once I made like around what I would have been happy with on the real one, like I stopped taking it. Like, cause if it went down, like that was just gonna stress me out, and like it was getting closer to the test, so I didn't wanna know. So once I was like happy with where it was, I stopped taking them.
Yeah. And I don't know anybody who like got like a 250 or 260 that started studying like before Christmas. You don't need to do it to do that.
When did you guys take your practice test?
So I took like one every 2 weeks, I guess the 6 weeks before the test, and then before that I took them once a month. Yeah, or something like that. Just divide them up. Like I don't think it's worth taking one a week. You're not gonna like make a big enough change. I mean, you might move like 3 points, and then that's, I guess it depends. Like if you're like, you know, in the 200s, like 205, then you're gonna make a big jump. But like once you get up to like where you wanna be, it's not gonna change that much week to week. And like 3 points is like a margin of error, so it doesn't really mean anything. And obviously the higher you get, the harder it gets to get more points because the thing's on a curve, so. Yeah. Questions? Yeah.
Do you know anybody who's trying to incorporate firecracker? And if so, do you think that's sufficient compared to like first aid?
I don't know anybody who used firecracker as a study tool, so. I mean, I think people did, but I don't know anybody who did, so I can't really comment. Most of the people I know did like DIT or first aid.
What was y'all's like mental health like during?
So that's what you need a study buddy for. Yeah, I mean, it's not like terrible. You're just doing it. Like at some point, it just becomes like after like the first week or two, it just becomes like that's what you're doing every day, and you get used to it, and you just do it, and you go home and you go to sleep. I guess it can get like a little stressful when you're taking practice tests if you're not doing what you want, but it's not like terrible. Yeah.
I would say like my hour at the gym was my sanity with like my TV shows. If I wouldn't have done that, I probably would have gone crazy. And then studying with other people, like you're suffering together, so it's not that bad.
Mm.
How long did it take you to go through one block of you?
So at the beginning, you're really slow. Like it may take you like several hours to review a UWorld, but you get faster. So like at the beginning, like it may have taken me like 3 hours to review it like the first week. but you get faster and then you can do it in like an hour, 45 minutes. One
Yeah.
tip for UWorld, I don't know if you would agree, but I would say when you do UWorld, only do it in time random mode so that you're getting like a good representation of like how step questions are gonna be. Like even if you haven't studied some of the sections when you start, I would say just like do it in timed random mode. Don't like study a section and then like do those questions because you just studied it, so they're gonna be fresh. And so just to get a good idea of like how you're doing, that's my advice.
Yeah. And like your UWorld score and your step score don't like, I don't know, there's like a 10-point difference between like those two, I think.
There's also
UWorld is harder.
UWorld practice test. I didn't take any of them because people's scores are normally really inflated on those to how they really do. So from what I've heard, like I wouldn't really recommend them. I think if you want to take practice tests, the NBMEs are better.
Yeah. Like, I mean, like ironically, UWorld, like it's a cube link. The score you're gonna come out with, like the percentile score you're gonna be in is gonna probably be lower than how you do on step, but the practice tests tend to overinflate. So I would stick with the NBME ones. Plus that just means you're gonna have more questions you have to review and you're not gonna wanna do that. Like there's a certain point where you're just like, I don't wanna deal with that anymore. Yeah.
What is something you wish you did differently? Or are you guys pretty satisfied?
I probably would have started sketchy and like drugs sooner. Like I knew that's what I was bad at, and so I just kept putting them off because I didn't want to do them. Like it turned out fine in the end. Like talking out drugs was definitely the best thing for me. Like I think I got all of my drug questions on step right because we talked them out for like at least an hour every day. But I wish I would have started both of those sooner.
And if you're like really bad at drugs, there's like a Lippincotts pharmacology book, it's red. Don't read the whole thing, but like if you need to like look up neurodrugs, it's surprisingly useful and gives you like a better understanding of why something works for something instead of just memorizing it in first aid. I'm not a big fan of memorizing stuff, so like if you understand why it works, then you don't have to like just make it stick. It just intuitively makes sense. So, for what it's worth. I don't know if I would do anything differently, like I was satisfied with the general outcome, but don't be too rigid is probably the biggest thing. Like if you don't want to do UWorld one day at some point, like just do something else. I mean, there's no point in like trying to force yourself. At some point you're gonna like be forcing yourself to read first aid or something and you're just gonna be rereading the same page for no apparent reason. Just pick something else, go do that, and then come back to it. Obviously don't like let that go on for, you know, days or weeks, but just take a break from some resource and move on to something else if you have to do that. And you don't like have to do everything. Like that's the biggest thing. As long as you like cover all the material and are like satisfied with the score you're getting, don't worry about doing everything. Like I did 200 UWorld questions a day for a week and then never wanted to do it again, and so I didn't. I left like 600 unanswered, but my step score didn't like go in the toilet because of it.
I did UWorld and then I repeated my wrongs. I know some people do it like 2 times or 3 times, so you'll just have to decide like how you want to do it, but I just repeated my wrongs like my last week.
Yeah. Yeah, people do that. I think the biggest thing is like, if you're gonna do a resource, you're probably gonna need to see it more than once if that's your main resource. So like, I was doing DIT and then like a bunch of other random stuff, and then watched all of DIT in like the week and a half before the test. So, I mean like, get like a decent pass of everything. Don't be like spending the last week doing just GI and then go take the test and have not seen cardio for 2 weeks. Just find a way to speed through it all. And that's the reason I like DIT is because you can just like put the videos on like 1.75 or double speed, and then you can literally plug through every organ system in a week. If you can get yourself to sit down for 12 hours a day. Yeah.
When you're doing that, like the 12 hours a day, are you taking notes or are you just sort of sitting there passively, like listening to it?
It depends. Like at the end, it was more like passive.
Right.
I would take notes like on the front end because you're like actually learning it. At some point, it's like toward the end, I would say it's less that you're trying to learn and more that you're just like trying to keep something fresh, so that when you see a question, instead of having to think about it, it just like clicks and you know the answer and you're done. Like it comes down to speed toward the end over like, you should know it by then, but can you answer it, you know, in 30 seconds versus a minute and a half? And that's the problem with STEP, is like 8 hours of testing. It gets pretty nasty toward the last 2 blocks.
Did y'all feel like you had enough stamina during the actual testing?
I did. I mean, you've been studying for this for a long time. Like, you have the adrenaline. Like, I didn't get tired. There's a lot of nerves. I had some, like, coffee beans or espresso, chocolate covered espresso beans or something, but.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you're gonna like kind of run out of like mental gas at some point, but if you take a break every block, you'll be all right.
Yeah, I took a break after every block too.
Yeah.
Just like to walk out of the room, like, I think it was helpful. Some people do it like after every few, but I like doing it after every block.
Yeah. What else? Yeah.
Can I ask a stupid question?
Yeah.
How many questions are in each block?
40.
Okay.
Yeah, when I was studying, I didn't ever do more than 2 UWorld blocks a day. And if I did, I would just do 2 and review both of those, but I never tried to do more than 80 questions a day.
Yeah. I mean, to some extent, there's like a limit for like how much you can deal with. If you do more than 2 blocks, you're approaching like taking a practice step, like the exam, and your brain's gonna hurt, and then you can't review it. Yeah.
For each time you answered the UWorld question, did you read through all of the answers or just
Oh god.
like that main chunk?
What'd you do, Shelby?
When I was like reviewing them or like when I was answering a question?
When you were reviewing them?
When I was reviewing them, so at the beginning, I read all of them like thoroughly, because you can learn a lot from the explanations. I mean, towards the end, I would like, if I knew it, I kept going. If I didn't, then I would read them.
Yeah. I would say if you know it, like, and you want to review something, just skip to the bottom. Because there's like the big chunk of text, and there's like why all the answers are wrong, and then there's like the learning objective or whatever it is. Just make sure you've got that down and move on. If you have free time and you're like studying from it, like that's your main study thing, then obviously read everything. But if you're studying other places and using that to like solidify, sometimes the wrong answer stuff is useful. Sometimes it's just like, well, this is wrong because X obvious reason, and you didn't get anything out of that. Like they didn't explain like the pathogens behind like the other disease that they said was wrong. They just said it was wrong. So, I mean, if it's taking you more than like 3 hours to do a UWorld block, do something different, because you're never gonna finish. And don't like write down the whole explanation. Just write down like what you didn't know. Like if you read the whole thing, just be like, oh, this random fact I didn't know. If you knew it, you knew it. You don't need to write it down to like remember it later. And it like gives you like some idea. There's like analysis on there to see like where you're at for different organ systems. If your like organ system or like micro or whatever is really low, then put some more time into that. And kind of use the practice exams for that too. Like, this is what I was bad at, this is what I need to do. That's what I did, you know. Don't spend equal amounts of time doing everything if you could spend like targeted time doing something you don't know and assume you know the rest. Anything else? Yeah?
Yeah, when did you guys start doing UWorld?
I don't remember. I don't know.
I started like mid to end of March.
Yeah, I think like toward the end of classes. I think for that last, whatever comes last, I did the UWorld questions for that class just to study for it. And then after that I started doing UWorld. Like once the class ended. Because I thought like you need to like have a decent base before you're gonna try doing a bunch of questions. So like spend that time when you're still in class studying, like look through first aid or DIT or whatever you're gonna use and kind of get through everything. And then once you've done that, you know, when you get to dedicated studies, start UWorld and get through it. Otherwise it's like really disheartening and you're like, why am I missing all these questions?
Yeah, don't give, I mean, you're gonna get frustrated with UWorld, but don't like let it get you too down, because you'll be like, oh, I'm making this progress, I'm doing good, and then you'll like do awful. And it's like really demoralizing when you're trying to study, but it happens to everyone, it's okay. But UWorld can like make you mad at times, but if your scores go like this, as long as it comes back up, it's okay.
Yeah. And there's like definitely some like mental exhaustion that occurs there. Like you're gonna get to a point where like your scores start dripping just because you're too tired, and that's kind of like a maybe you should take a break and do something a little bit easier for a while. Yeah.
How did you manage to study while studying for your classes?
You don't really have to study for those classes. I mean, honestly, like it's not like super complicated. You can take that week before the test, and that'll be enough. I mean, like just plan your step studying. If you're gonna like start studying while you're in class, take 3 weeks, study other stuff, and then the week before the test, decide that's the week you're gonna go over first aid or whatever you're gonna use for, derm or whatever is on the test.
When you started in January, how many days did you set aside for each like chapter or first aid? Kind of sense.
So what I did, because I did the passes, like I knew, I just like got out printed out all these calendars, and I was like, okay, like first pass, I think it's gonna take us like about 2-ish months. Like we just kind of estimate how long we thought it would take, and then we like wrote on the calendar when our midterms and when our finals were from all the classes, so that we could put that subject on that week. And then we counted like how many pages were in each section of first aid, and then just like depending which section it was, estimated how many days we thought it would take us, and then we wrote like that many pages on each day.
Yeah. And if you're gonna do like Anki or something like that for like biochem or immuno, you don't really need to allot a bunch of time, because it's literally they took the entire chapter and turned it into questions. Like you don't need to look at it. There's nothing there that you haven't seen. I don't think I started studying before the first practice exam. So I took the first practice exam to see where I was at, and then I think I went through all of the material before the second one, if that makes sense. And then you can kind of see like how you improved and move on from there. I mean, obviously the first practice exam gives you I mean, if you're at like a 190, that's a very different scenario than if you get like a 225 on the first practice exam or something like that. Which is not to say you can't like make up the difference, but if you get a 225 on the first practice exam, you're not gonna make, a 80-point jump in your score, because it's not possible. You're not gonna get a 280. Yeah.
Do you think there would be any advantage of getting the new EIT?
No. So my problem with DIT is like they have like a very rigid system of like how they want you to use DIT, and they give you the study book, and you only get access for like 42 days, I think. So if you're gonna do that, then you have to like do all your other studying, and then like that 6 weeks before the test you do DIT according to their schedule. If you get the less legal version of DIT, then you can do it whenever you want, if you want. Like if you want to do DIT this week and not do DIT next week, or you want to use that for your first pass instead of reading first aid, you have more flexibility. Whereas like with DIT, once your 6 weeks are up, your 6 weeks are up, and you gotta buy it again. And there's not like a lot of new info in the new one. It's like first aid. Like there's not a lot of new stuff in the new first aid. So I don't know if it's worth it, but it's great. It's just the restrictions are kind of difficult.
How much time do you dedicate for sections like psych and biostats?
Yeah, I mean, make sure you learn biostats, because it's important.
There's also a UWorld section on biostats. It's
Yeah.
like pretty good.
Did you do like there's like an extra UWorld thing you can buy for biostats?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there's an extra thing on UWorld you can buy that's like a biostats review, and it just kind of goes through everything. I thought it was pretty helpful.
Yeah, I mean, they're easy points, so make sure you know it. I mean, at some point, you either do like, it's not like, they're not complicated questions. Like, you can either do the math to get you the answer, or you can't. Just make sure you know how to do it, and if you do, then you're good. Don't miss the questions, but don't spend like a week trying to learn biostats, because there's just not that many of them.
I would say like a few days before the test, like write out all the formulas, make sure you know them.
Yeah.
Because that's easy points, and if you don't know the formula, then you can't answer it. And then also the section in the back of first aid that's like random facts, I would say read through that, or there's like an Anki deck on it, go through that, because it's just like easy stuff to make tree.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. So there's another Anki deck besides the Prosencephalon one that's like, I want to say it's like it's not a lot, it's like 600 cards, which is not a lot on Anki because you can do them in like 10 seconds each. And it's just rapid review. It's basically like word association. So they'll give you like some like key clinical finding and then like the diagnosis that basically is like a sure thing for. And if you do the Anki for that, it gives it to you both ways. You get the diagnosis and then the clinical finding you want with it, and you get the clinical finding and the diagnosis. And it also has, somebody added in a lot of pictures of like common derm things and like common like, I guess like microscopy slide stuff. And so that's just useful for like the easier questions where you can just like read the first line of the question and you're done. You don't need to read the rest of the question, you know what it is. So, and it kind of keeps stuff fresh. If you start doing it early, you'll memorize it, and you'll also just kind of have to think about like stuff you studied a week ago or 2 weeks ago, you know, like little tidbits here and there.
There's also a practice test that's like on the NVMe, the STEP website, like where you sign up for STEP. So on there it actually has like heart sounds. So I would say listen to those. I know several people who like the heart sound on their test was the exact same one that was on that. And so like it's like the same sounds, like same pictures. So I think it's like 110 questions or something. Like don't worry about your score, but I would say like a week before, sometime in that week before, like do that one just like for pictures and sounds, because some of it has like shown up on people's real tests.
It's not actually useful for a score because they don't give
Yeah.
you like a correlated step score. They just give you like a % right, and you have no idea what that means. But I think I had like 3 heart sound questions on my test. So they're not hard. Like it's the kind where you like can move, like you can click in 4 spots and hear it there, and like click on the carotids, and like if you can hear it in the carotids, it's aortic stenosis, you're done. You can pretty much figure it out from that. Just make sure you understand like how to use the interface, and make sure your headphones work when you take the test, because otherwise you're just going to be missing questions for no apparent reason. And then also BRS, there's like a BRS behavioral science. I wouldn't recommend buying the whole book because it's like 95% psych, but there's like 3 chapters in the back that are study design, like ethical problems, and biostats. And it'd probably take you like an hour to read all of it and do the questions, and it's pretty much everything you need to know for that.
Which one's that, sir?
It's BRS, like behavioral science. Yeah. Don't read the psych section because you don't need to know that much psych for STEP. It's pretty basic. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on capital videos?
I know people who did them and did well. I feel like it's like DIT or Kaplan, it's your call. I don't know how long Kaplan is. DIT is basically like first aid in video form. I think Kaplan's going to be a little bit different. So the only nice thing about the DIT videos is like if you have somebody who's studying with first aid and you're studying with DIT, like it still works perfectly because it's the exact same content. It even goes in like the same order. Like if you open first aid and like follow along while they're doing it, it's like they're going the same way that first aid goes. So, but they do like kind of pick out stuff that's a little more complicated, or like stuff that's not that well fleshed out in first aid, and like explain it. And they have really lame skits that are entertaining. Yeah.
Just one last question. Did you have like a specific strategy of answering questions? Like did you, for example, look for a buzzword, or did you like read the last sentence of the question?
Yeah.
Read the whole thing?
Like read the last like sentence or two. Sometimes the last sentence is just like a really basic question. But like read the last sentence or two. Yeah, if you read the last sentence or two, I would say that there's probably like 15% of questions you can just answer it, because the whole thing will be like this giant build-up, and then the like second to last sentence will be like the patient has diabetes, and then there'll be a question about diabetes that has nothing to do with this patient, and so you wasted all that time reading a giant question stem for no apparent reason. So read the end, and then even if that doesn't work out, like you'll have an idea of what you're looking for when you read the question. So some people read the answers before they read the question. I didn't do that because I felt like if you read the answers, you're looking for like specific things. Whereas if you read the bottom and then like read through the block of text, you'll usually like arrive at like the diagnosis, and then you can just click it and move on. So you'll figure it out. I mean, you're gonna do like 2,400 UWorld questions, and however many practice tests you do, you'll figure out like what speeds you up and slows you down. You can try different stuff on new world blocks and see what works. Anything else? No? All right.
Alright, guys. Thank you, Logan. Thank you, Shelby. Can we get a round of applause, please?